As day 100 approaches and the Israeli hostages are still in the hands of Hamas, Israel is attacked again, this time at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. 2 days of exchange of arguments between South Africa, the accuser, and Israel are behind us. I watched these proceedings partly, and I have many questions. In order to get them answered, I'm now connected with Tomas Sandell. Thomas, welcome to our talk.
Thank you.
You are the director of the European Coalition for Israel. At the International Court of Justice, Israel is accused for violation of the 1948 Genocide Convention. What is this?
Yes, it's very interesting that a convention that came about just 3 years after the end of the Holocaust is, and with the clear intent of making sure preventing another Holocaust, is now used against the Jewish people. So the convention is a way of preventing and criminalizing a crime which had never been defined or verbalized before, namely genocide. And genocide, we'll have to remember, is exactly what Adolf Hitler, his intent in wiping out systematically a whole people group, the Jewish people. So the Genocide Convention, as you rightly mentioned, was then adopted in 1948, and Israel obviously was one of the first countries to subscribe to this convention. And as I mentioned, it's a convention that will make sure that genocide will not happen again and will be criminalized in international law.
Now, South Africa states that genocide is now happening at the hands of Israel. How, by the way, is genocide defined? What is that? You said it's only vaguely defined?
Let me read, and I have to put on my glasses. The deliberate killing of a large number of people from a particular nation or ethnic group with the aim of destroying that nation or group, a campaign of genocide. So there needs to be a clear intent. And this is, of course, one of the grounds where the South African accusation is completely baseless.
Well, Tel Becker, the Israeli lawyer representing his country in The Hague, blames Hamas of the genocidal terrorist organization, being responsible, of course, for the terror act brought on Israel on October 7th, along with its sponsors, namely the regime in Iran. He spoke of the tunnels in Gaza as the most sophisticated terror base in an urban situation entrenched in a civilian population. So Israel definitely sees things differently, pointing out the use of human shields as an act of terror. Could this be defined as genocide? Because in that case, it would be the Hamas committing genocide, not only against Israel, but even against its own people. What is your opinion about that?
I mean, it's completely clear, and I think this is what the civilized world is recognizing, and hence we have large countries like the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, and now Germany, who have actually made a decision to become part of this court case, a third party, because they see the danger in trivializing what they went through quite recently, a real Holocaust, a real intent of a genocide. And I think for the Germans, as for the Jewish people, this is a very painful experience to see how this is now being weaponized and used in the complete opposite intent that it was meant for. So much could be said. I mean, as you mentioned, the court case, if there was to be one in The Hague, should be against Hamas, who clearly has in their charter a clear intent of wiping out the Jewish people. And it's not only in letter, but it's word and deed. So what we saw on 7th October was just one demonstration of what they really like to do. And later on, of course, they have said this is what they want to do time and time again, as often as they can. So there should be no doubt that there is a clear intent of wiping out, of a clear intent of committing genocide, but not against the Palestinian people, but against the Jewish people and against Israel. So this only shows that this has very little to do with international law. It's completely a politicized course of action. And we also have to see who are the ones who are bringing these charges. It's the same regime that was just a few weeks ago hosting a Sudanese warlord who have been prosecuted for war crimes at The Hague. It's also the same government that just prior to launching this probe was in Doha, Qatar, in very important meetings. We have to remember then that Doha, Qatar, this is where Hamas, the political wing, is now hosted. It's also a government that invited Hamas, a clearly defined terrorist organization, to the, I think it was the 10th anniversary of the passing of Nelson Mandela, very recently in December. And in addition to this, and I think this is very important for us to know in Europe, this is a country which is very close to Putin and to the Russian regime. So it's very clear that there is an intent. The intent is, I think, to help Russia on the one hand to get the attention away from the war in Ukraine. They've done so very successfully. Now this is dominating media, not what is going on in Europe, not very far from both of us are based. And you can also say, and to use the words of Tal Becker, that South Africa is becoming the legal arm of Hamas, again, exercising what we call lawfare, twisting of international law in a very detrimental way.
I just got a video from a friend from South Africa stating Christians in South Africa are on the side of Israel. Hopefully this is so. We, of course, know that not everybody would agree with this. But in order to get a clearer view, I would just like us to look at a few clips from the proceedings in The Hague, something that was recorded yesterday during the session of the ICJ.
In one video recorded by a home surveillance system, a Hamas militant throws a grenade into a safe room where a father and his two sons have rushed to hide. The father is killed. The two sons are injured and bleeding as a militant pulls them into the living room. One child can be heard screaming to his brother, "Why am I alive? I can't see anything. They're going to kill us." The militant casually opens the fridge, takes out a bottle and drinks. And then there is this recording from Kibbutz Mefalsim. قاعد بكلمك من جوال يهودية قتلتها وقتلت جوزها 10 فيديو يابا قتلت 10 يابا 10 فيديو قتلت يابا افتح الوقت شوف كيف قتلت يابا افتح بدي عليك وقت تقول له وين بروح 10 فيديو يابا دمهم على ايدي اعطينا امي. The annihilationist language of Hamas's charter is repeated regularly by its leaders with the goal, in the words of one member of Hamas's political bureau, of the cleansing of Palestine of the filth of the Jews.
الدولة لابد أن نزيلها لأنه بالفعل هي تعتبر كارثة أمنية وعسكرية وسياسية للأمة العربية والإسلامية، يجب أن تنتهي. لذلك احنا لا نخجل من نقول ذلك بكل قوة، إنه إسرائيل لازم نأدبها وحنأدبها مرة ثانية وثالثة، ومش هذا حتكون طوفان الأقصى أول مرة، لا حتكون ثانية وثالثة ورابعة.
Israel, Tal Becker says, has a right to self-defense, saying we are fighting terrorists, not civilians. He pointed out that none of Hamas crimes are mentioned in South Africa's complaint at the ICJ. This argument is only self-defense. Is this plausible, considering the high number of casualties we hear? Figures reported are above 20,000. It is always assumed that it's civilians and children that are dying. How can we put this into perspective?
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that needs to be pointed out. Tal Becker again did so very well at The Hague. One thing, of course, is that this is a very interesting war situation where Hamas is trying to maximize the number of civilian deaths, whereas Israel very clearly is trying to minimize the number of civilians, which is completely in contradiction to warfare throughout history. This is not how war are conducted, generally speaking. And this is why Colonel Richard Kemp, the commander of the British troops in Afghanistan, has called IDF the most humanitarian armies of all armies in Europe. Second thing, of course, is to take into account that the numbers, 20,000, have not been verified. Also, that those numbers, no one puts into questions, by the way, that innocent civilian have been casualties, but the numbers, it's very clearly includes combatants, that is terrorists, Hamas terrorists, and it also includes people who have been casualties of friendly fire, if you want to call it friendly fire, because Hamas is clearly using civilians as human shields. So we don't know.
And many of their rockets are misfiring, like it happened in the event at this hospital that was reported. And the blame, of course, was given to Israel within minutes without any proof. Later, it was shown that it actually had been a misfired Hamas rocket.
Yes. So 20,000, Hamas is not the most trustworthy authority. So we should always put that into question. But just as much as we defend Israel, obviously, we don't. Every death of a human being is a loss, is a tragedy. But as long as life is so cheap on the Hamas side, this is something which will eventually continue to happen.
About a month ago, you were in an interview together with the Austrian member of European Parliament, Tomas Sandell. He made a very strong statement. He said, don't throw money into the black hole of Hamas. Western nations, of course, are very eager to give humanitarian aid to Palestinians, now really trapped in very tragic situations. But this is not always successful. Surprisingly, the other day, the UNRWA, which is the refugee organization caring for Palestinians, issued a complaint about Hamas stealing humanitarian aid at gunpoint from one of their storehouses and using this to replenish their own resources instead of sending on this aid to the people in need. Do you have any details about this?
I don't have any details, obviously, but this is not, it shouldn't come as any news. Hamas is consistently abusing the civilian population, the civilian infrastructure, and one would obviously have to ask the question: where on earth do you find the money to build this very sophisticated underground tunnel system? Where do you find the money to have rocket missiles to the point that they have right now in Gaza? So obviously, money that we are sending from the West to Gaza has been systematically misused, and as Tomas Sandell rightly said, we'll have to completely review our way of helping this part of the world.
Is this already happening? You are based in Brussels and have a closer view of things. Are politicians becoming more and more aware of this?
I think there is a divide. There is a divide which you see in society. A growing number of people, a growing number of political parties are becoming aware of this. Within the European Parliament, they are asking the European Commission to condition aid to Gaza, to have a better accountability system, whereas there are others who, for some reason, are very afraid of any form of accountability, and clearly have a different agenda than wanting the best for the Palestinian people, wanting to see peace. And this is the real problem. And this is something we need to bring up as Europeans, that we have been, it's not only on the one hand, yes, it's giving away financial aid without real accountability, but it is also financing both UNRWA and the Palestinian authorities and indirectly Hamas with their very detrimental education and education from kindergarten to high school and university, where Jewish lives are being demonized in a very systematic way. And this is the core of the whole discussion. No human being wakes up suddenly on the 7th of October and say, well, let's go over and kill and rape and I don't even want to go into all the details what happened on the 7th of October. This is inhuman. And it doesn't happen overnight. And I think this is the fruit of the indoctrination that the Palestinian people have been part of since the Oslo Accords. And the funding for this education comes from Europe. So Europe is not without guilt as to what happened on the 7th of October. We have been pointing out this in the European Parliament for years and years and years. Tomas Sandell has been doing so since he was elected, but mostly for deaf ears.
Well, perhaps this helps to open ears to the realities of what is happening. The events of October 7th are mostly forgotten, it seems, especially if you look at Western media coverage. However, South Africa's initiative at the ICJ seems to get significant resistance in some European nations. I'm quoting from a BBC program where it says, the German government issued a statement on Friday saying it expressly rejects the accusation of genocide against Israel and that the accusation has no basis whatsoever. In view of Germany's history and the crime against humanity of the Shoah, the federal government sees itself particularly committed to the Convention against Genocide. We firmly oppose its political instrumentalization, something that obviously now is happening. And the same from the United Kingdom. A spokesman for UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said Mr. Sunak believed South Africa's case was completely unjustified and wrong. The UK government stands by Israel's clear right to defend itself within the framework of international law, he said. What are you, as the European Coalition for Israel, doing to raise awareness and support in this case of Israel, especially in times like this?
Well, first of all, it's important to point out that European Coalition for Israel was founded already more than 20 years ago. And one of the first things that we pointed out, and we did so both in national capitals and in Brussels, was the misuse and the mismanagement of EU funding to the Palestinian territories or to the Palestinian Authority, I would say. At the time, there was a lot of resistance in not wanting to acknowledge that there was a problem, which very interestingly led to the election victory of Hamas. Overnight, everything changed in Brussels, and it was no longer taboo to say that there was a real problem of corruption with the Palestinian Authority, and this is what led to the election of Hamas instead. Interestingly, there has not been another election since that one in I think it was 2005. This is something that doesn't change overnight. We'll have to consistently keep informing, keep educating, keep pushing, making advocacy to raise these issues, because we know that those who are against us, and we see this on the streets of Europe, we see it at the International Court in The Hague, we see it in many of the media companies across Europe, that there is this growing hostility against Israel, against Jewish people, not against Hamas. And this should be a very sober reminder that never again is now. When we started this European Coalition for Israel, I had asked myself the question, what would I have done in the 1930s when I saw these early, or people saw the early signs? That question is not only a historical question today, it's a question for now. What will we do, our generation, when we see people marching on the street, demonstrating, saying from the river to the sea? This is really the time for us to stand up and be counted.
Now, a two-day session at the International Court of Justice are behind us. What is your estimation? What will the outcome be?
It's really too early to tell. I fear that the outcome could be detrimental for Israel. I can already say that it will be detrimental because it's not the outcome as such that will form the opinions of people. It's the fact that it has been giving so many media coverage, and the normal person on the street would say, if there was not a clear case for this, you would not even be discussing it. But now it's up front in all media channels, which means that the cause has already been lost on the streets of Europe. They will not understand the nuances of a legal statement, which may have one or half a sentence condemning Israel, implying that there could potentially be a genocide. This is a PR war. And of course, the South Africans, the Russians, the Qataris, the Iranians, they knew it. It's not the outcome which is important. It's almost like saying, have you stopped beating your wife? And once you get into that discussion, people already have a preconceived ideas that here is a person beating his wife and he's trying to defend himself. The discussion in itself is detrimental. It should never have been brought to The Hague, make the International Court of Justice irrelevant as the same way as the UN Human Rights Commission in Geneva. And that's very sad for the rule of law in international relations.
This is not the first time in history that Israel is under accusation. Actually, throughout history, this has happened. As the European Coalition for Israel, you're definitely also specifically a coalition of Christians. From a Christian point of view, or Judeo-Christian point of view, this hatred against Israel, against the Jews, do you see any spiritual significance that goes beyond what we're seeing politically right now? Why is it always the Jews who are to be blamed?
Yeah, no, clearly, and I said this in many instances when people try to explain the roots of anti-Semitism, and they look with a 100-year perspective and look at National Socialism. But obviously, if we study history, we see that this is something that has always been there in European history in particular. A lot of it is also grounded in bad Christian theology. So when people speak about Islam as being the only problem today, it's not true. We just have to look at ourselves. But I think the first time that Jew hatred on this level is mentioned in the Bible actually brings us back to the time of Queen Esther, when there was this same obsession of wanting to annihilate a whole people group. And you may remember that Haman explained to the king that, this is a people group who are different from us. They worship a different God. They have a different culture. And so this is clearly something that is expressing itself time and time again throughout history. Its expressions will be very different. It could be Christian theology, it can be Islamic jihad, it can be National Socialism or Soviet-inspired communism, but the spirit behind it is always one and the same, Jew hatred, and not only being against the people of Israel, being against Jews, but the God of Israel, ultimately.
So any solidarity with the people of Palestine should not be sympathy for Hamas, and we should be very careful of keeping those things separate. We know of many instances where Jews and Arabs are cooperating in a very positive way within Israel, even across the border to Gaza. There were outstretched hands, aid offered. Any experience from your side where you've seen that Arabs and Jews can go together peacefully?
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to remember again why I should say October 7 happened. Um, it was just a matter of time before Saudi Arabia would join the Abraham Accords. This historically unprecedented rapprochement between Arabs and Jews across the Middle East. And I think today it's very important, and we have the clear proof that this is the case, that the problem is not that Jews and Arabs cannot live side by side, that Jews and Muslims cannot live side by side. They can, and they've proven it. But there are two camps today. It's a camp of peace, and there's a camp of confrontation and war and annihilation. And here as Christians, we just clearly have to choose sides. We cannot be with the regime of South Africa, with Iran, with Russia, and other regimes which are clearly in the camp of confrontation and war. There is an alternative, and the beautiful thing is that today the Abraham Accords are still intact, and we just have to hope and pray that this camp will win.
We will not be silent
this way
again.
we can see peace and prosperity in the whole region of the Middle East. And this, if anything, is what will benefit the Palestinian people.
Free those people
not
immediately.
the intent of Hamas,
like you, who shared
the intent of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, but people who really want to live side by side, work together, and look at the future.
I'm just living on that right now.
January 27th is the Holocaust Remembrance Day. This will have very special meaning this year. What will you do on that day? Do you plan any events?
We will be in Geneva, which interestingly is the European headquarters of the United Nations. We will have a symposium inside the United Nations with faith leaders and diplomats. Because again, our responsibility, as I mentioned before, is to speak to our own people, to the Christian Europe and to its leaders. And we are very fortunate to have high-ranking officials from all of the main church families in Europe attending and speaking at the conference. And we hope that out of this conference will come a clear message in support of the Jewish people and a clear trumpet call to stand up against anti-Semitism. Because what we sadly have seen until now is that Christian church have been very quiet. It has been very quiet, and I think in the Jewish world there is a disappointment that to say that, why on earth can they not see what is going on? And we had a case when we did a large rally in Geneva together with the family members of the hostages, and we just had one demand, and that was the release of the hostages. That one large Christian organization that claimed to represent us refused to be part of it because there needed to be a call for ceasefire, they said, in order for this to be balanced. A ceasefire, of course, we know would only benefit Hamas. It wouldn't benefit the cause of peace. So there is a problem. We want to address this, but we also see that within the Christian camp there will be very distinguished bishops and metropoles and the Catholic Church, one of the key people working for Jewish relations there. So there is a remnant, if you want to call it that really want to avoid the mistakes of the past and be different this time around.
So please schedule some time for another interview. I'd be very eager to hear more about what happens in Geneva on Holocaust Remembrance Day, and we'll definitely see each other again. Yeah, and for all of you, our viewers, this is something that concerns all of us. It's not just a remote place in the world where one of the many conflicts is happening. This is really cutting at the heart of many things. So if you feel this is important information, please share this video, comment it, like it. It's important that these voices, Tomas Sandell, thank you very much that voices like yours are being taken to the public, because much of this is simply not heard in our mainstream media. So thank you for the time you have taken today.
Thank you.